Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Indiana basketball mini-series tickets are now available online at IUHoosiers.com. Both 5-game and 3-game packages are now available, featuring games against Louisiana Tech, South Dakota State, Arkansas, Northwestern, and Ohio State. Come check out your Indiana Hoosiers for these games over break inside beautiful Simon Scott Assembly Hall. You can visit IUHoosiers.com for more information. Go IU!
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, we were joined by Jon Crispin, who we always love talking to in the offseason to get his unique insight on Big Ten basketball, on the Indiana Hoosiers. Jon, of course, has been calling games for a while for the Big Ten Network, but as we talk about in this episode, a little something has changed there, which is probably going to disappoint a lot of people who have enjoyed Jon's work, but you'll hear that off the top of this episode. But we get into a lot of really interesting discussions about, why Indiana struggled last year, why Jon thinks Indiana has a really good chance to be better this year, kind of look around the conference, talk a little bit about Penn State and what needs to happen for the Nittany Lions to fulfill some of the hype that they have this offseason. Jon's thoughts on the impact of the extended three-point line, his expectations for Devante Green as a senior, and a lot more. We always enjoy our chats with Jon, and we get a lot of good feedback on him, so we feel that you guys do too. So enjoy this conversation with Jon Crispin coming up right now. Jon Crispin, welcome back to Podcast on the Brink.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really do. I appreciate this every year. It's one of those programs that is, we talk about it. It is near and dear to my heart. We're not supposed to root for anybody, but I just seem to think that basketball in general is better when Indiana's good. So I do in some way root for the Hoosiers, particularly because my other half is a full-blown Hoosier, and I have to.
Yes. So, okay, we have some good news and some bad news to hit here right off the top. I think we'll start with the good news, which you just alluded to, and that is that you and your wife are expecting, and you just sent me a text message with this picture of an Indiana jersey with the number 1 on it and Crispin on the back. Do you want to? Do you feel comfortable sharing the importance of this? Because I feel it will really endear you to the audience here as we begin the podcast.
Absolutely. Look, I've never been lacking for comfort in many things, especially when it comes to talking. So I'll have at it. But no, my in-laws are all Indiana folks. Huge Indiana basketball fans. I was engaged at Assembly Hall in their season tickets, in their season seats. So it's a special thing for them as well. My wife was a cheerleader there and graduated in 2012. And we basically surprised them by announcing their first grandchild, by giving them an Indiana basketball jersey, number 1 with my name on the back. And they were a little slow to get it, which concerned me a little bit. We on the East Coast, we just tend to be quicker and more abrasive about things. In the Midwest, everything's just kind of low key. We take our time. They were grateful and appreciative. And then it finally hit them that they realized, like, oh, I get it. The first grandkid, then yes, it's going to be your name. They finally caught up, but it was exciting and much less exciting for my parents because they already have 9. So it's just like, that's great. You know what I mean? We're two individuals who are now retired and just looking at their bills going up. So that's about it. But no, definitely exciting for the folks there in Zionsville.
Well, congratulations. That is, there really isn't much more exciting than that. Have you decided how this youngster will be raised? Will they be raised as an Indiana fan, a Penn State fan? Are you going to let them just be open and make their own decision? Has that been discussed yet?
It's funny is like I have the luxury of having them root for Penn State football and Indiana basketball because I'm a total front runner anyway.
It's a good way to do it.
People, it's funny. People hate to admit that. They hate to admit that they cheer for the best teams. 2 years ago, if you asked me who's your favorite team in the NBA, I would have said the Warriors. Because they're the best. I like to see the best perform at high levels, and there's something about the tradition of it, the history of it, the kind of the conviction in the fan base, for better or for worse. It doesn't make it easy. I was a part of that at UCLA, and it was not easy, especially when you're struggling. But there is nothing like it. There's nothing like a game in Assembly Hall. Sorry to Penn State. It's a little bit different at the Bryce Jordan Center. And hopefully at some point they can turn that around. But then, I have the luxury of just saying you're going to be a Penn State football fan. Indiana's having a great little run here, bowl eligible season, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
But nothing like the undefeated Nittany Lions at the moment. So I'll play both, and we'll just call that a political move more so than anything else.
So I mentioned some bad news, and astute listeners may have noticed that I did not introduce you as Jon Crispin of the Big Ten Network. You have left us, and we will no longer get the joy of Jon Crispin calls on Indiana games. Do you want to explain why you will not be on the Big Ten Network this year?
Yeah, it's just funny. I've already had some people reach out, nice people to say oh, you see, you weren't that good. The Big Ten Network wouldn't bring you back, and I was like, you're right. I don't know what to tell you. But no, I like LeBron. I took my talents to Bristol, Connecticut. I did sign a new contract with ESPN, and I had been there 2 years prior to the Big Ten Network. But somebody in my situation, I'm not a big name. I'm not a Shane Battier. I didn't play at the highest level. So my climb in this business might be a little bit slower or take more time. And that's kind of what it's been, where it's been more focused on games the right way, serving the game, better than anybody else. And eventually, moving on at a time when that's acceptable elsewhere. Because the Big Ten Network there for a while was the place. If you just wanted to focus on the sport, it was the Big Ten Network, because the focus was on the institutions, the teams, the coaches, the players, and even a general respect for the officials. You develop relationships that allow for that. But the time kind of came with ESPN where they just said, hey, look, we've got a great opportunity for you, and we're going to open up some doors. And with the ACC network, there's some guys that moved from Bristol to the ACC network, and it opened up a good opportunity for me. So I will have some Big Ten games. Not sure what they look like. It could be here and there, but I will have an ACC schedule Tuesday nights, and a chance to work with Reese Davis, who's just fantastic. And then I'll be doing Saturday wrap-ups in the studios and some support here and there for game day, as LaFonso Ellis is moving to the game day crew and Jay Williams moving to the NBA. So it's a good opportunity, and I hope to be able to be myself there and not have to, be the fake news guy that I get concerned with at times in this business.
Well, Jon, as someone who's always been great to us, and I know I can speak for Jerod that we're happy for you. We think the world of you. We always enjoy listening to you on broadcast. Enjoy running into you. It sucks for, I think, Big Ten fans that we won't get to hear you as much. But as someone that's a full-time supporter of Jon Crispin, the announcer, and just the person, we're thrilled for you just to kind of move up in your career. But
thank you.
What I have to ask you now is, as we enter year 3 of the Archie Miller era, I think Indiana fans are starting to scratch their heads and say, when are things going to happen here in Bloomington? They look at Chris Holtmann, what he's been able to do in 2 years at Ohio State. And it's never fair to compare situations because every situation is different. But just from, working for BTN the last 2 years, being around the program a little bit, how surprised are you at where Indiana is right now? And do you see a path for them to kind of climb up the hierarchy here in the league in the near future?
Yeah, it's challenging because when you talk about, fans waiting to see this turnaround, waiting to see things really come to fruition, my question is always, what exactly are you waiting for? Because so often with these blue blood programs, we have an ideal image, we have an idea of what it should be. And the problem is that's not who Archie is. And that's not a knock. I think we've always kind of, especially at the Big Ten Network, we've been really careful how we said that. Archie Miller is not the type of coach that is just a one-and-done guy, get the best talent, get him to play hard for a year and then get him out. That's not who he is. He is a win with less, motivate, teach, coach him up, play tough defense. I mean, he's an identity culture coach, right? He's got a certain identity. He needs to adhere to that identity. He needs to coach to his personality. And sometimes guys, and this was my issue last year, and I think we talked about this. That was my concern with Romeo Langford. Is not only does he really not make you better 10 years from now, because he really doesn't. 10 years from now, you're going to be like, oh, that's right. He played here. He doesn't make you better 10 years from now. So what does? Well, what does is something that builds what the future is going to hold. And I feel like this year, more so than any other years under Archie over the last couple of years, this looks more like an Archie Miller team. Kind of a couple of underdogs. I mean, there's obviously talent. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Rob Finney's terrific. I think Trace Jackson-Davis is on another level, but they're not loaded. It's not one of those teams. So I feel like this team looks a little bit more like the personality of Archie Miller, and that's important. It may not look the way you wanted it to look when you thought about bringing in a new coach and we're going to get the best recruits and, we're going to compete with the Kentuckys and the Dukes of the world. Well, you can compete with them, but you may not look like them. And I think that's where Indiana fans have to be really, really honest with themselves and just say, do we want to win and compete, or do we want to look like the other Blue Bloods? Because you don't have to look like them to beat them. I know when we were at Penn State, we beat a lot of top 10 teams, and we, for darn sure, did not look like what they look like in terms of the athleticism, the length, and even in certain positions, the skill. So Archie's got an opportunity now to coach a team that has perceivably less talent, perceivably less hype, particularly coming off a season where so much went through, two guys in Juwan Morgan and Romeo Langford. And at times you see others stand and watch. Well, you don't develop those players when they stand and watch. You don't develop those players when no one really moves and plays aggressively on the offensive end. So I actually like this team more so than any other teams. I was not thrilled about the team last year, particularly because you brought a guy in that you knew was a one and done. You knew it just wasn't going to be a long-term thing, so he's not going to make the program better for years to come. So I like the team this year, and I also like the opportunity they have with the middle of the pack of the Big Ten being so wide open to get things back on track, make an NCAA tournament, establish some identity, find that culture that you want to recruit to, because ultimately that's what's sustainable. What's not sustainable is thinking that you're just going to get the best talent and you're always going to win. That's not really who Archie is. And I think the biggest challenge is he came in at a time where two other coaches in Brad Underwood and Chris Holtmann are having success. And that's where the pressure really sets in when you see a team in Illinois that is definitely on the rise. And they had a brutal schedule to start the season last year, but they are certainly on the rise. And then Chris Holtmann, who I always felt, and this is a tough thing to say, I always felt like Chris matched Indiana better. But it doesn't matter. I think we get caught up in that. Chris was kind of that guy he's just quiet, does his business. He recruits well. He plays a very, it's a simple, it's fundamental basketball. I think Indiana fans would like that. But you got Archie Miller, and he's a certain kind of guy too. And this is the type of team that could start to turn things around, finish themselves, anywhere from 4 to 8 I see in this conference. And I think that gets them back on track.
Hey, it's Jerod. I want to hop in here real quick and tell you about our friends at Home Field Apparel. They are back for another year of sponsoring Podcast on the Brink. And if it's been a while since you've been to their website, homefieldapparel.com, I highly recommend that you go check it out because they have really expanded their product line of Indiana gear. And no matter what Indiana team you cheer for, no matter what style you want, they have something for you that is in their own kind of special brand of unique logos, unique vintage logos, really comfortable, high-quality material. You got to go to homefieldapparel.com and check it out. They've been releasing a new IU football-themed shirt all through the football season, so you can browse through all of those, and they have all of their classic basketball designs there, the national championship design, the sneakers design, which is in 3 different actual styles, one specifically tailored for women. So they've got all kinds of stuff for the Indiana fan there, and whether you're looking to get gear for yourself for the season, looking to pick up Christmas gifts, Home Field Apparel is the place to go. And when you go there, use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and you will get 20% off your entire order. So not just one item, but your entire order, and that promo code discount is actually up from 15% last year. So they love our audience. They love this show, and that's one of the ways that they show it is by giving you a discount like that. So again, go to homefieldapparel.com, click on Indiana, browse through all the different items that they have, pick up the ones that you like the best, and use that promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, and 20% off that entire order. Promo code BRINK at homefieldapparel.com. All right, now back to our conversation with Jon Crispin.
John, it's interesting you mentioned kind of that, I guess, glut of teams in the middle. To me, in the Big Ten, I like Michigan State. Obviously, everybody does. I like Ohio State. I like Maryland. After that, it feels pretty wide open. Who do you kind of see? If you were making, I guess, tiers in the league, who do you see maybe in that next tier of teams that Indiana is going to be competing for to be able to have a chance to make the tournament?
It's tough. I mean, we know about Michigan State and Maryland in particular. I think some people question Maryland and they don't like Mark Turgeon, which I don't really get. I mean, Turgeon's a different dude, but he gets great players, and he does get them to play hard. There are certain things they don't do. They don't turn you over, so I think that's a limitation of theirs, but they have a ton of talent, so they're going to be good. I think the teams that you got to look for, and no one's really talking about them, is the Wisconsin Badgers. You lose Ethan Happ, but if you watched enough last year, late in the season, they played a lot with Ethan Happ on the bench, and they were better. And that's not one of those like addition by subtraction. It's just a different team. Nate Reavers is far better than anyone realizes, but he hasn't been great in the role that he's had playing behind, Ethan Happ and not having the space that they're going to have now without Ethan Happ in the post. I mean, they're going to play with better space. Nate Reavers is a legitimate 3-point shooter. So that's a team that is dangerous, particularly when you start to think about slower teams that perceivably can't create. You think of Iowa, not a lot of creators on that team, but a lot of shooters. Well, what do shooters do? They create space. And with the 3-point line being extended to 22 and 1 3/4 inches, 22 feet, 1 3/4 inches, it actually creates more space on the floor. So those are the teams that I think you've got to watch out for the most. The Iowas, the Wisconsins, the Illinois of the world that can space you out, and they have playmakers to make plays. I think Ohio State's going to be good this year. But when you think about Indiana and where they fit, it's Wisconsin, it's Iowa, and even Minnesota and Penn State. Penn State is another team that is incredibly dangerous, particularly with Amar Stevens. But we have yet to see the substance from Pat Chambers. I think we've seen that. And look, I'm a Penn State guy. You can't help but to pull for a team. You don't root for them the way a fan does, but you want to see the program do well. Much like I want to see the Indiana program do well. I think it's good for the Big Ten, and I think it's good for college basketball. But Penn State is in a situation this year where they have to win. They've got one of the best players, and if I'm being frank, I think he's one of the best players that Penn State's had ever. In 6'9", 6'10", he's starting to space the floor. He's great in transition. He's the first team All Big Ten, hands down, and likely a 22 and 10 guy. So this has to be the year for Penn State, and I would say there's probably as much pressure on Pat Chambers in a different way than the pressure that Archie Miller has this year for them to finish somewhere into the upper echelon, kind of that top 5 of the conference standings.
Well, let's stick with Penn State for a moment, because this offseason we've kind of gone around the Big Ten and done previews of all the teams, and Penn State is really the one team that people are projecting to be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there that we haven't gotten to yet. Everybody knows about Lamar Stevens. They know about kind of the history of Pat Chambers and some of the pressure that he's under. What's going to make the difference for them? I mean, obviously losing Josh Reeves hurts, but they, it seems like they've got some ability in the backcourt. What is going to allow or disallow Penn State to live up to some of the hype that they're getting this preseason?
Well, I'll start with what's going to disallow them to live up to that hype, and it's the same thing that would make them good if they were able to find it. But I think it's getting late in the process to find this, and that's identity. Penn State in general, they didn't need to get turned around. Penn State basketball doesn't need to get turned around. It needs to get established. And that's a big difference. And quite frankly, I think No one wants to hear this because Indiana fans would say, well, we're not Penn State, we're a basketball school. That's great, but you're not right now. That's the truth of it. You're not right now. So what does Penn State and Indiana need that is the same? It's identity. Who are we? Who are we going to be? Who are we going to be next year and the following year? And how are we going to be able to get better and better and better at being that and doing the things that make us good? That's something that both teams really need. And, at 8 years for Pat Chambers, we know him to play tough. We know him to be talented, but we haven't seen consistent, sustainable success. And I think it really comes back to who we are and what we do. I'm not sure Penn State has that. They adapted to Tony Carr when he was there, and it changed the team. They're now adapting to a Lamar Stevens because of the hype he's getting, yet a lot of the development has not revolved around playing through a guy like Lamar Stevens. They have Lamar Stevens and Mike Watkins, who is healthy, who is in a better place mentally. They're going to have a really strong front court, but without shooters and without a system that creates high percentage 3-point shots, you're going to struggle. And that's where the inconsistency comes. It's never an inconsistency in terms of lack of effort. It's an inconsistency in terms of a lack of execution. And that's where things can change for Penn State. But if they don't have it this year, then they never will. And I think that's the real challenge. And it's something that Archie should be looking at as well, saying, who are we? Not just what do we represent. The Indiana Hoosier basketball brand is second to none in the country. I mean, it is up there with the biggest and the best of the Blue Bloods. But without an identity, even if it's an identity, not to bring up John Calipari in Kentucky, even if it's an identity that we're just going to get the best talent and have them for a year, coach them up for a year, and try to win with talent, that at least establishes who you are. And I think that is more important than anybody can understand, because players adhere to it, fan bases kind of grow accustomed to it. You know what to look for. And I think that's been a big challenge for Indiana fans is night in, night out. You don't know what you're going to find. And that's ultimately what you want first and foremost. I want consistency, because with consistency, we can see growth. That's like any business that has been successful. You've got to have some idea of where you're going and what you want to be if you want to be able to track your growth. And that's going to be an issue for both teams this year.
When you talk about consistency in college basketball, so much of that revolves around your backcourt, having an experienced, competent backcourt that has chemistry. I don't know how much you followed the kind of the minutia of Indiana's offseason so far, but, they kind of entered this season a little bit thin in the backcourt as it was, with Rob Finney, Devante Green, Al Durham, and Armon Franklin really as the only ball handlers. And, we've kind of learned over the last week that, Rob Finney hasn't been able to practice much for a month. Devante Green's been nursing a hamstring. Al Durham's had a little knee issue. So this recent exhibition game, Armon Franklin basically took all the reps at point guard except for about, 10 to 12 minutes that Rob Finney played, really rusty. Yeah. And the question I have for you is, kind of a general question about this, which is, these guys may all, be healthy for the first game on Tuesday. But how much of an issue is it that they've missed so much practice time? Like, Devante Green's a senior, so he's been around. Yeah, what kind of impact, what kind of lingering impact could that have? And are there any signs fans can look for in games to show that has been an issue all this time that they've missed?
Yeah, and you'll see a lack of chemistry. It's a combination of things. Look, if you don't have players healthy, you can't compete in practice. And that's been an issue for a lot of teams in this conference. It's been an issue for Minnesota at times. It's been an issue for Iowa at times, and Wisconsin. Even some of the best. It's been an issue to the point where you don't have two groups that can go at each other competitively, and you can't grow. I mean, you just can't. You can't develop things that you're going to need in a game, and you see that when teams lack chemistry on the floor. And chemistry, people think chemistry is like, oh, they play well together. No, it's like they feel one another. That's chemistry. Chemistry is not something that I look and we communicate well. That's communication. That's just understanding fundamentals and how to play. Communication is obviously important, but chemistry is, I don't even need to communicate. You know what to do. We trust our instincts. I know when I'm on the floor with this guy, he does this, so I'm going to take this backside away. That's the chemistry that you develop by playing and competing in practice. And you're really handcuffed when you don't get good reps in practice, when you can't create situations in practice that guys are going to experience in the game, especially when it's a program that's trying to find that consistency. So I think that's a bigger challenge than anybody realizes. And it's not, we think of rust. We think of like, well, Rob Phinisee going to be a little rusty. It's not that. Part of the rust is his own timing, but part of the rust is the timing that he hasn't been able to establish with his teammates. And that is a big issue. And I know people don't like to hear it because they say that's an excuse. Excuses and reasons are different. Reasons still can be overcome. And I think that's the challenge. And that's why coaches get paid the big bucks, is regardless of the reason, they have to find ways to overcome. And one of the ways to overcome is to cycle in the guys that you trust, the guys that know how to play, and get the younger guys in with groups that are established. Get the young guys playing with experienced players who know the right thing and can actually lead some of these young guys to be able to play at a level like they would be if Rob Phinisee's on the floor, who understands the game a little bit more and does have that experience of a year. So it is a challenge for coaches, and I do think that's where you do see the cobwebs or the rust, as we say, when you watch the first few games. But luckily there's time. There's time to figure some of that out before the schedule really gets crazy.
John, one of the, I guess, things going into the season that people would point to and say, Indiana could be worse this year is the fact that Juwan Morgan and Romeo Langford are gone. I guess the counterpoint to that would be, now that all the focus isn't on two guys, it kind of allows the other guys to organically grow into whatever role that maybe they're better suited for. Do you think there's an argument that Indiana could be better with a more committee-by approach, particularly offensively, when you have maybe 4 or 5 guys out there who could present a challenge offensively instead of just focusing on 2 guys for the most part?
Absolutely, and I'll compare this one to Duke. I was just in a seminar the past couple of days up in Bristol, and a lot of people were talking about how it's not going to be the same with Duke not being as good, and I'm like, it's so easy to say that they're not going to be as good because Zion Williamson's not there. But what Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett brought was inconsistency shooting the basketball. Where did that come from? Well, it happens when young players watch 2 stars. That's what happens when you just watch the game. You never develop rhythm. You never develop a flow to the game. And when that happens, you don't shoot the basketball well. I mean, you look at Duke, Jack White, Cam Reddish, Trey Jones. Those guys could not shoot the basketball. Why is that? I mean, everybody's saying, oh, they're a bad shooting team. And I always said, well, that's lazy. What's that mean? Why are they a bad shooting team? The real reason is early in the season, they learned that this was RJ Barrett and Zion Williamson's show, and everybody else just had to make a shot if the ball came their way, make a play every now and then. And you start to watch. And when people start to criticize that you're not making enough outside shots, you start to think about that as a young player. You don't have any rhythm in the game. And I think it's a similar situation to Indiana last year, where guys weren't confident early, which put more of a pressure and expectation on Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan. They stepped up to the plate. They really did. They stepped up at times, not every single game, not consistently all the time, but they did step up and they made big plays. The problem was nobody else really got developed. Nobody else really got into a rhythm. And now with more balance and better spacing and more balanced attack in terms of 5 guys that can make a play, you're going to see shooting percentages go up. I mean, people think, well, they didn't shoot well last year, so that's obviously going to be the case this year. It's a completely different lineup. It's a completely different approach with actually more confidence in those guys because you're empowering them to do more. And that psychological approach is something that is discussed. It is considered when you think about trying to get guys to do a certain things, trying to get guys to be confident shooting the basketball. Well, part of it is empowering them to do so. And at times that was not the case last year when you relied so much and so heavily on 2 individuals. So I do think the argument is there that they should be better. I don't think that they can be better. I think they should be better. And that's not a knock on Romeo. It's certainly not a knock on Juwan. That guy is one of my favorites in terms of guys I've gotten to cover in the Big Ten Network. It's not a knock on those guys. It's just that it's a different team. And it's a team with a little bit better balance. And the hope is if they can stay healthy enough and develop a chemistry and a feel for one another along the way, they're going to be successul. Are they going to win the Big Ten this year? No, I don't see that. That would be crazy. Michigan State's on another level. So is Maryland. But I still think they can be competitive at a high level to the point where they're back in the NCAA tournament and people are talking about Indiana basketball as relevant once again.
Jon, two-part question here. Do you like the increased distance on the three-point shot in college basketball, and what impact do you think it has, if any, on the game this year?
Well, there's two things I like that they did. First, it was extended three-point line. The other one was on an offensive rebound, the shot clock resets to 20 and not 30. You're creating better pace in the game. You're creating better rhythm in the game when you eliminate that 30-second reset. Because what happens when a 30-second reset happens? You pull the basketball out, you look over to the bench, somebody's holding up a card, you call a play, you run this fake offense for about 15 seconds, and eventually you get into a ball screen and you try to make a play. I mean, it drives me crazy about college basketball, this concept of control. This is starting to eliminate the control aspect of it, where you say, we're not giving you as much time to just control the basketball. This isn't football, where you're just going to run the ball every single time and give the opposing team's offense 10 minutes to score in the game. That's not going to happen. That's not the way it is. We want rhythm. We want flow. And I do like that they've done that. And the three-point line is not about guys being able to make outside shots. It's about creating space for the length that we have in this game. With better space comes higher percentage shots. With better space comes less fouling. With better space comes more rhythm, more flow to the game. And when there's more rhythm and more flow, you're going to see shooting percentages go up. And when you have, and the thing is, it's not about having guys that can make those shots. It's having guys that can draw the defense to you. So if you have, even an Evan Fitzner from last year, he didn't shoot the ball particularly well, but when he got a look, that defense closed out hard. When you have guys that can knock down that shot or at least just draw the defense out, you're going to create opportunities, easy scoring opportunities with a drive and kick or a drive and dump off and, short mid-range jump shots. You're going to have a lot more of those opportunities, those high percentage opportunities. So I think extending the three-point line is huge. It probably should have been done a while ago, and it has nothing to do with guys' ability to make deep shots. It has more to do with the fact that you've got to help create better space on the floor, because better space is also going to mean less whistles. And less whistles, good Lord, is one of the greatest things that I think we're all looking forward to.
That would be wonderful.
Yes. And less hook and hold reviews.
Yes. So tying your last two answers together, speaking of the 3-point line and guys who certainly won't shy away from a longer 3-point line, is Devante Green. And I think Devante Green is also a guy, when you talk about players benefiting from getting into a rhythm, maybe understanding their role, not just standing around watching Romeo and Juwan. To me, that is why I've kind of argued all offseason that I'm expecting a big breakout season from Devante Green. You've gotten a chance to watch him for 3 years. What do you expect from him now as a senior, who's kind of going to be, assuming he gets healthy, of course, going to be in this go-to scoring role? What do you think he can do realistically in his final season?
Well, I think it's got to be more of a go-to playmaking role. If you go back to the point I made about the 3-point line, if you are a guy that draws defense out, like for me, this would have made me as a 2-guard in the Big Ten more of a playmaker. Because it's rarely the first drive and kick that gets the basket. It's usually that second drive and kick to a guy that's relocating off of the initial drive that gets the open shot. So his ability to get inside the teeth of the defense, and we hear teams use terms like get downhill, paint touches. Well, paint touches for guards is huge. It completely shifts the defense. It puts the defense in a situation where they're scrambling to find all 5 players. They're going to help up and stop the ball, and then it's scramble mode. And I think Devante Green's role is less about just scoring and more about creating opportunities. He's going to score. When you create opportunities for others, this is Steph Curry. Steph Curry creates a ton of opportunities for others, but if you watch how he relocates, he makes the pass, he gets himself out to the corner, ball swings, he's the one who's wide open. And it sounds crazy. How is Steph Curry open as much as he is? Well, it's because he does such a great job creating for others, and he puts the defense in a situation where they have to scramble out and find everybody else. So for Devante, it's hard because he is a scorer. He's a kid with a ton of swagger, and he's got the ability to do all that. But he's got to trust that the more he creates for others, the more it's going to come back to him. And that's not an easy thing. I never really trusted it when I was that age. I was always seeking out my shot, but my hope is that the maturity is there. He's got the experience, and the focus is more about, when you have that sense of urgency as a senior, you're at a point where you're like, I've been here, I've done it, but we haven't won at the level that I want to win. The sense of urgency to win is there. And when you have that sense of urgency, a lot of the self stuff goes away. And it really is about, what do I need to do to help us win? And I do think it comes down with him being the initial playmaker, even more so than a Rob Finney, because there's a certain wiggle to Devante's game that not many people have. And he's got to be able to capitalize on that, but it might not be for himself. It may be for everybody else.
Well, Jon, last question for you. We really appreciate, as always, your generosity with your time. Now that you're not going to be doing Big Ten games anymore, which Big Ten road trip are you going to miss the most, and which one are you going to be okay with not making anymore?
Well, I would say there's two I'm going to miss the most, they both reside in Indiana. It's Indiana and Purdue. When you grow up where I grew up in South Jersey, I grew up an Indiana basketball fan. And why? Because I was a basketball fan. And I loved watching Bobby Knight teams. I loved seeing the old Isaiah Thomas teams, right? There's so many guys that I honestly can run through a list of players that I identified with. And that's the type of thing that I always think of with Indiana is like, they weren't always the best players in the country, but they were the best teams. And it's something that we've gotten away from in this one and done era, where we feel like it's this, both the arms race in facilities and the arms race in recruiting. You don't really need it. Indiana had some of the best teams because they had the best team. And I think that excites me about Indiana now. And I hope that it's something that the fan base really can get behind to say, you know what, we don't need to be like everybody. We don't need to be like Kentucky. We don't need to be like Duke to play at their level. I think that's an attitude that should be embraced. It should be part of the identity. And you have to accept that Archie is different than any other coach that you've had there. And it may look a little different, but the hope is that the outcome eventually becomes the same. And there'd be more pride in the fact that we don't need the 5-star recruits. We don't need those guys that have the announcements that they come here, but when they come here, they play with a chip on their shoulder, understanding what they represent, the history of a program that people who love basketball, they do appreciate Indiana. So I do think there's something there. I'll miss Purdue because that's another great environment. Why is it? Well, it's Indiana basketball. There's something special about Indiana basketball. Obviously, Michigan and Michigan State are other places that are great for basketball. I'll miss Nebraska. I love the trip to Nebraska. It's a great environment. It really is, and it'll be really interesting with Fred Hoiberg this year, the Haymarket District there, if you've ever had a chance to go to Pinnacle Bank Arena. It's just a great little area for sports. So I don't know if there's one single place. I know Rutgers. I'm interested to see Rutgers' new facilities. And I'm actually going to get up there for a practice here in the coming weeks to see their new facilities. But there's not a single place that I would say I'm happy I don't have to go to. It probably would be Rutgers, but I'm a Jersey guy, so we kind of like that stuff. We like taking the train up to New Brunswick. That's just kind of how we roll. So the Big Ten's a special place. And if Dockich ever lets up on his Big Ten package, maybe I'll get myself back in.
Oh my goodness, that I'm going to need a moment to process what you just said, because that would be incredible. A lot of people would be excited about that. I do have one final question. Is there any chance that you'll be there for the Indiana-Florida State game, Big Ten ACC Challenge? Have those announcements been made?
I will not. I have Iowa at Syracuse that day. I know. I trust me. I looked at the schedule and was like, ah. But the other thing is, I'm at that level where I get really good stuff, but I always run the risk of, getting booted out by Dick Vitale and Jay Billis. Because when you have really good games, they have the opportunity to come in and say, I want that game. And I have to smile, grin, and bear it. So I'm sure that'll happen at some point. And likely if I had that Indiana-Florida State game, that's a Florida State team, that's going to be a great challenge. That is going to be a great challenge. And that's a game where the spacing on the floor will dictate the outcome of the game. Remember, I said that. Spacing on the floor will dictate the outcome of the Florida State game. If you have good spacing, Indiana can win. If you don't have good spacing, I don't see Indiana having a chance with the length and athleticism of Florida State. So if you think I'm going to miss a Big Ten game, you're crazy. You're out of your mind. The best thing is I get to be more of a fan and less of an analyst this year. So that's actually a joy for me.
Well, Jon, we always appreciate you coming on. We will miss your calls on the Big Ten Network this year, but we'll hope to get you on some future Indiana games on maybe a Big Ten ACC challenge here or there, because you always do a great job calling Indiana games. So we'll miss hearing you do it and look forward to the next time we get you on one.
I appreciate it. Always happy to join you guys.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jon. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jon.
Hey, seriously, always enjoy it, guys. Anytime you want to talk hoops, man, I'm game. I really do enjoy it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.